They say moving is one of the most stressful things a person can do. Whoever said that never faced an HOA drunk on power. It was a Saturday morning in late April. Cool air, soft sunlight, the kind of quiet that made you believe the day might just go smoothly. I had my truck loaded with boxes, tools, and a second-hand couch that had survived 3 apartments. My son Ethan drove separately, towing a small U-Haul. He was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. This was his first property bought with every dime he'd scraped together from construction jobs while finishing night school. At 27, he was stubborn in all the best ways, determined to carve out a life on his terms. I was proud of him. More than he knew. The property sat on the edge of a suburban neighborhood called Silver Pines, tucked behind a stretch of wooded land. Ethan had chosen it carefully. Technically, it wasn't part of the HOA. It had its own access road, its own mailbox, even a small creek weaving through the back. But it bordered the HOA's territory. And that I'd soon learn was a problem. We parked side by side and got to work. I hauled boxes labeled kitchen and books. Ethan was unloading his tool chest and a battered guitar case when I saw the golf cart. At first, I didn't think much of it. But as it rolled closer, I noticed the bright yellow vest, the clipboard, and a tiny dog riding shotgun. A Yorkie with a ribbon in its fur. The woman driving wore a visor-oversized sunglasses and an expression that said, "You'd already let her down." "Can I help you?" I asked halfway up the porch with a microwave in my hands. She didn't smile. "You're not registered." "Excuse me." She stepped out of the cart. "You're not on the moving schedule. This area is governed by the Silver Pines HOA, and all move-ins must be registered 14 days in advance." I blinked. "This land isn't part of the HOA." She gave a hollow chuckle, the kind that says you're about to be taught a lesson. "Sir, every property on this street falls under HOA regulation. It's in the community map." Ethan stepped up beside me. "That map's outdated. I bought this plot privately. It was never annexed into the HOA." She narrowed her eyes. "Do you have proof?" "Of course," Ethan replied. "It's inside. We've got all the documents." She didn't even glance at him. "You need to cease all activity until this is verified." "You're kidding," I said. "It's a moving day, not a zoning violation." She reached for her walkie-talkie. "I'll have to report this. You're unloading unauthorized equipment. That's a code violation." Ethan and I exchanged a look. He took a slow breath and went inside to grab the folder. I set the microwave down and followed. Inside the house was mostly empty, just paint cans and cleaning supplies. Ethan pulled a thick manila envelope from his backpack and handed it to me. Title deed, county survey. Everything. I flipped through the papers. The parcel ID was clear with a note stating no recorded HOA agreement or annexation. Black and white. Legal. And still that didn't stop her. When we came back out, the golf cart was gone. For a moment, I thought she'd realized her mistake and left. But minutes later, 2 more carts arrived. One carried a younger man built like a gym trainer. The other held an older man in a crisp polo shirt, who introduced himself as Vice Chair of Community Affairs. They didn't ask our names. They didn't ask to see the documents. They just repeated, "You're in violation of HOA protocols. You need to stop immediately." I felt heat rise in my chest. You can't just show up and give orders. This isn't your jurisdiction. The older man looked at Ethan and said, "Son, if you keep unloading, we'll have no choice but to call the authorities." Ethan said nothing. He just stood there, hands at his sides, face unreadable. Then I made a mistake. I said, "Go ahead, call them." I wasn't trying to provoke them. I thought the police would see our paperwork and end this. But HOA types like these thrive on drama, on control. And within 10 minutes, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into the gravel driveway. A young deputy stepped out. His face was neutral, but his hand hovered near his belt. "We got a call about a disturbance. Something about a property boundary dispute." I stepped forward, calm but tired. "That's us. We're moving into my son's property. The HOA thinks they have authority here. They don't. The deputy turned to the HOA men. Is that correct? Absolutely not, the vice chair said. They're unloading heavy equipment without permission on protected community land. Ethan opened the folder and offered it to the deputy. I own this land. It's parcel 17D purchased through the county's private sale program. It's been outside HOA jurisdiction for over 30 years. Here's the deed, the survey, and a letter from the county clerk confirming it. The deputy glanced through it. His brow furrowed. The HOA man leaned in. Those surveys are outdated. We have a map from the HOA board that includes this land in our community. The deputy looked at him. The HOA's map doesn't override county records. Silence. Then from behind the golf carts, the woman from earlier reappeared. Officer, I have reason to believe they're planning unauthorized renovations. There are power tools in the garage. I laughed dry and sharp. That's called a drill, ma'am. People use it to hang shelves. Ethan stayed calm, but I saw his fists clench. His dream home, a place for peace, had turned into a circus in hours. And I felt helpless, furious, protective. The deputy finally said, I'm going to call the county assessor's office. If this property is outside the HOA's jurisdiction, this isn't your fight to pick. The HOA folks didn't move. Neither did we. And as I stood there under the rising sun, with boxes half unloaded and my son's life on hold, I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a turf war. And we'd just drawn the first line in the sand. The next morning I was back before sunrise, a cup of black coffee in one hand, a heavy sense of dread in the other. Ethan hadn't slept well. Neither had I. Yesterday's tension still clung to the bare walls of the house. The boxes sat untouched. He hadn't even unrolled his mattress. I didn't think it'd start like this, Ethan muttered, staring out the window. It's just noise, I said, trying to sound reassuring. They made a scene. That's what people like them do. You've got the law on your side, and that's what matters. But I knew that wasn't entirely true, because noise becomes power when it's relentless, when it chips away at your peace day after day. At 8:15, sharp tires crunched gravel. Another golf cart, but different. White with gold trim, custom plates reading SPHOA1, and a laminated sign clipped to the roof, President on duty. It stopped just off the property line, and out stepped a woman who looked born to issue ultimatums. Blonde hair in a tight bun. Pastel blouse tucked into beige slacks. She carried a leather folder and wore a pin with the HOA logo, 2 pine trees, and a white fence. Her name tag read, Marlene W., HOA President. Yes, her actual name was Marlene. Ethan sighed audibly. Here we go. Marlene strode across the gravel like she owned it, like she'd laid every stone herself. She stopped 3 feet from where we stood by the garage, didn't smile, and extended a manicured hand toward me. Good morning. I'm Marlene Whitaker, president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. I assume you're the renters. I didn't take her hand. My son owns this property, I said flatly, and we're moving his things in. Her lips twitched. That's odd. There's no record of this lot being sold in our files. Ethan stepped forward, cool but direct. Because your files don't govern this lot. Her head tilted like a cat sizing up a mouse. All properties within Silver Pines are subject to HOA oversight. That includes Parcel 17B. This is Parcel 17D, Ethan replied, holding up the deed from yesterday. It was carved out separately in 1985 and never annexed. Marlene's eyes scanned the document, her mouth tightening. Well, that would be a matter for our legal review committee. No, I said. That's a matter for the county, which we've already spoken to. Marlene ignored me. Regardless of the ownership debate, you're creating a disturbance. We've had complaints about noise, unauthorized parking, and improper disposal of materials. That's 3 violations. We're moving in, Ethan said. What do you expect us to do? Hire a crew to whisper? Marlene attempted a smile. We expect all residents to follow guidelines. If you refuse to comply, we'll escalate accordingly. She turned and walked back to her cart, scribbling in a notepad. As she drove off, Ethan shook his head. She really said escalate accordingly, like this is a hostage crisis. I watched the cart vanish down the road. It's not about rules, Ethan. It's about control. People like her don't like being told no, especially when they're wrong. We tried to keep unpacking, but soon the consequences arrived. First came warning letters printed sealed and stuck to a stake near the mailbox. Then an orange sticker on Ethan's U-Haul unauthorized vehicle, subject to tow. Ethan peeled it off and looked at me. They're really doing this. I nodded slowly. They are. That afternoon, we visited the county office. Ethan requested an updated plat map, which confirmed in bold ink that parcel 17D was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. The boundaries were clear, surveyed, certified, and logged 6 weeks ago when the purchase closed. Everything was airtight. The woman at the counter laughed when Ethan explained the situation. "They're pulling that trick again," she said, shaking her head. "You're not the first. Talk to Clara at City Planning. She's been handling these complaints all year." We drove to City Hall and met Clara, a soft-spoken planner with graying hair and a wall of old maps in her office. When we showed her the documents and mentioned Silver Pines, she sighed, half amused, half exhausted. "I've been waiting for this," she said. "They've been bullying everyone on the fringe into compliance. They draw their own community overlay maps, then act like they're enforceable." "Can they get away with that?" Ethan asked. Clara shrugged. "Depends on how loud they are. Some people cave, some move. You've got legal standing, but they'll make your life hell if you let them." That night, Ethan barely slept. He sat on the porch with a beer, staring into the dark, his thoughts far away. "They're trying to wear me down," he said quietly. "Like if they act like they own it long enough, I'll give in." I sat beside him. "You bought this land with your own money, son. You're not trespassing. You're not in violation. You're building your life." He nodded slowly. "They don't care about facts. They just don't like someone saying no." The next morning, we arrived to find the driveway partially blocked. 2 orange traffic cones sat near the culvert, and a new wooden stake was hammered into the ground by the creek. A laminated sign read, "Notice. This area is under temporary review for environmental impact. No digging or development permitted without HOA clearance." Ethan stared, stunned. "Environmental what?" "They're making things up now." It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was war. It was barely noon, and the air already pulsed with tension. Not heat, but the kind you feel when someone's itching for a fight they can't win. Ethan and I stood by the property's edge, staring at the laminated environmental impact sign claiming authority over his land. It flapped in the breeze, a flimsy monument to bureaucratic bullying. "Temporary review," I muttered. "They just invented that." Ethan crouched to inspect the stake. It had the Silver Pines HOA logo, a tiny pine tree smugly proud of itself. "This is trespassing," he said. They crossed the line. Literally. He was right. The stake was 2 feet into Ethan's property line. We'd measured everything after Clara gave us the updated survey. This wasn't a prank. This was an escalation. We knew what was coming. By mid-afternoon, Marlene Whitaker was back. This time with backup, the vice chair from before, a security contractor in a tactical vest labeled HOA enforcement, which was laughable, and a woman with a clipboard, some kind of note-taking sidekick. They approached slowly, like staking claim in a medieval skirmish. Marlene didn't say hello. She pointed at the stake. "You'll need to cease activity near the creek. It's under review." "By who?" I asked, arms crossed. "By the HOA Environmental Standards Committee," she replied smoothly. "We received a report of runoff from your vehicle movement. We're investigating sediment displacement." "Sediment displacement," Ethan repeated, incredulous. "This is grass. No construction, no digging, no concrete. We're moving boxes." Marlene handed Ethan a paper. A notice of violation, official-looking, with seals and bold fonts claiming our presence near the creek violated sections 3.124.03 and 5.14 of the Silver Pines Environmental Impact Code. I took it from his hand and scanned it. This isn't a legal document. It's not even signed by a municipal authority. Marlene's voice sharpened. We don't need city approval to enforce community standards. This is a private neighborhood. No, I said. It's not. This lot isn't in your jurisdiction. We've been over this. I'm calling the police, she snapped. You've refused to comply with our investigation, and now you're verbally aggressive. Ethan's laugh was dry and humorless. You're unbelievable. Marlene turned to her enforcer and whispered something. The man nodded and pulled out his phone. I hope they bring the same deputy, I muttered. 15 minutes later, a cruiser rolled in, a different officer this time. Older, slower, with a furrowed brow that said he was already tired of this nonsense. I'm Officer Bennett, he said, stepping out. Got a call about trespassing and community code violations. Marlene strode forward with confidence. That's right. These individuals are damaging protected green space and refusing to comply with our review process. The officer looked at Ethan and me. Is that true? No, Ethan replied, calm but firm. I own this land. It's parcel 17D, not subject to HOA jurisdiction. We've spoken to the assessor and City Hall. We're just trying to move in, but they keep escalating. Officer Bennett held up a hand. One at a time. He took the papers from Ethan, scanning the deed and survey. He took his time. I watched Marlene shift uncomfortably, eyes flicking to her clipboard assistant. Finally, the officer looked up. From what I can see, this property's outside Silver Pines HOA boundaries. Marlene stiffened. But they're violating our environmental codes. They're not part of your HOA. Bennett replied, his tone patient but firm. They're not subject to those codes. They're still in violation of the spirit of community, she snapped. You should be enforcing order. Bennett raised an eyebrow. I enforce laws, ma'am, not spirit. Her face flushed. She stepped back, seething. The officer turned to Ethan. Do you want to file a complaint for trespassing or harassment? Ethan hesitated. He looked at me. I nodded. Yes, it's time. Bennett pulled out a notepad. I'll file an incident report. You'll need to come to the station to make it official. I suggest boundary markers, survey flags if you have them. I already ordered them, Ethan said. Marlene turned without a word and marched to her cart, her lackeys trailing. As they drove off, I saw her yank off the laminated sign and crumple it in her fist. That night, Ethan filed the harassment report. I watched him at the police station, jaw clenched, hands steady. He wasn't afraid, he was fed up, and he wasn't backing down. Back at the house, the sky had darkened. We sat on the porch again, not speaking for a while, just watching the woods, listening to the creeks rustle, the night birds chirping, like none of this mattered. After a while, Ethan said, they thought we'd fold, that we'd see a badge, a citation, a sign, and give up. I nodded. They picked the wrong guy. Damn right, he said. They don't know who they're messing with. He paused, then added, but maybe it's time they found out. I leaned back and smiled, because I knew what was coming next. The next day was supposed to be quiet. That was the plan. No drama, no confrontations, just moving forward. Ethan had called friends to help with heavier furniture, and I brought breakfast sandwiches and thermoses of strong coffee. We were ready for sweat-sore backs, maybe splinters, not another HOA ambush. But the universe, or at least Marlene Whitaker, had other plans. It started with a screech of tires. We were unloading a leather love seat from Ethan's trailer when a gray SUV pulled up fast. The door slammed. Out stepped Marlene in a navy blazer over a white blouse, looking like she was headed to court, not a neighbor's property. Behind her were two men. One was the HOA enforcer from before with his fake tactical vest. The other older in a suit, a thin folder under his arm, walking like someone used to being obeyed. Marlene spoke first. You've left us no choice, she said, eyes on Ethan. We're issuing a formal cease and desist effective immediately. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. On what grounds? The man in the suit opened his folder and handed over a document. I'm Victor Langston, legal counsel for the Silver Pines HOA. This is a temporary injunction request filed with the Community Review Board. Pending approval, we ask you to cease move-in renovations or land alterations until jurisdiction is clarified. I took the document. It looked real standard legal phrasing stamped with today's date. But it was built on a lie that Ethan's property was under their domain. Ethan didn't take the bait. He didn't raise his voice. "You have no authority here," he said simply. Marlene narrowed her eyes. "That's not for you to decide." "No," Ethan said. "It's for the county." And they already did. He motioned to the porch, where a plastic tub held laminated property documents. He pulled out the survey map and spread it across the truck's tailgate. "This," he said, pointing at the thick black boundary line, "is where your HOA ends. This," he tapped the other side, "is mine. Parcel 17D, legally distinct, not subject to your rules codes or community board." Marlene stepped forward, but the lawyer stopped her. "Even if that were true," Langston said calmly, "you're in violation of the Community Access Road Clause. Your driveway connects to a lane maintained by HOA dues. That makes you a benefactor of HOA resources, thus liable to compliance." That was the twist. I knew it the moment I heard it. They'd shifted tactics, no longer arguing property lines, but access points. A technicality to trap Ethan. "You mean the gravel trail that existed before the HOA was formed?" Ethan asked. Langston shrugged. "Intent and use are factors. We'll let the board determine." "No," I interrupted. "We'll let the county determine." "You're not a court," Marlene snapped. "You're obstructing community procedures." I turned to her fully. "Marlene, this isn't a gated community. It's a neighborhood. And you're not a sheriff. You don't get to harass homeowners with fake citations and strong-arm tactics just because you're uncomfortable not being in control." She bristled, but I wasn't done. "I served in Iraq. I've seen villages torn apart by people who thought power meant ownership. You're not enforcing peace. You're creating chaos." Langston spoke calm but steely. "This discussion is being documented. Any threats?" "There are no threats here," Ethan cut in. "Just truth, which you think you can drown with paperwork and intimidation." The standoff drew attention. A neighbor across the road came out, gardening gloves on. A couple jogging by slowed, watching from the sidewalk. Then an engine's rumble broke the tension. A white pickup with city insignia parked on the shoulder. A man stepped out, short, stocky, late 50s, with a badge and clipboard. It was Clara, the city planner. She walked past Marlene's group without a glance. "Ethan," she called. Ethan raised a hand. "Yeah." Clara nodded. "I got your message. Sorry for the delay, had to verify the jurisdiction issue." She opened her clipboard and pulled out a stapled packet. "This is the county's official designation of Parcel 17D as privately owned, free of HOA designation or liability. Recorded 6 weeks ago, certified by the Planning Commission, ratified by the Registrar's Office." She handed it to Ethan, who turned it so Marlene could see the highlighted section. "Furthermore," Clara continued, "the access road is a public right-of-way easement maintained by the city, not the HOA. That means you folks have zero claim to enforce anything here. Zero." Marlene's mouth opened, then closed. Her lawyer looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Clara looked at the officer. "If these people continue to harass or interfere, Ethan has grounds for legal recourse." Bennett, who'd arrived with Clara, stepped in, arms relaxed, but voice firm. "I suggest everyone take a breath. This isn't HOA property. Any further interference will be documented and reported." Marlene stared at Ethan, her eyes a mix of confusion and indignation. For someone used to ruling over lawn heights and mailbox colors, being publicly overruled must have burned. Langston gave a polite nod and said quietly, "We'll review and get back to you." They left. Not in a cart, but in the SUV, dust kicking up like a retreating army. Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding. He turned to me and chuckled bitterly. "Still think this place will be peaceful?" I put a hand on his shoulder. "It will. But only because you stood your ground." We resumed unpacking. No interruptions, no signs, no citations, no golf carts lurking. But we knew the war wasn't over. They weren't done, and neither were we. For the first time in days, there was silence. Not the kind that means everything's okay, but the kind when your opponents are regrouping. Ethan and I spent the afternoon unloading the last of his belongings. Bookshelves, a second-hand mattress, handmade furniture he'd built during his apprentice years. It should have felt like a victory. But a heaviness hung in the air, the weight of unfinished business. That evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table flipping through Clara's documents. He wasn't reading so much as studying, looking at what they represented. His name, his signature, the parcel number, the official stamp of ownership. "I worked 3 jobs for this," he said quietly. "Saved every cent. Slept in my truck some nights. I bought this land clean, no debt, no co-signers, no favors." I sat across from him, arms crossed. "And not one of those HOA people asked your name." Ethan looked up. They saw someone young, single, unfamiliar, easy to push. "They saw someone they thought couldn't fight back," I replied. He nodded. They didn't know who they were messing with. And that was when something shifted. Ethan had been reacting all week, defending, responding, tolerating. But now he was planning, strategizing. I saw it in his eyes, the same focus from his high school wrestling days, the same quiet fire from the year his mother died when he had to grow up too fast. The next morning we drove to City Hall. Clara greeted us with a smile, part sympathy, part admiration. "I figured I'd see you again," she said. Ethan shook her hand. "I want to go deeper." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Deeper? I want the full history of Parcel 17D. How it stayed out of the HOA, who approved it, any annexation attempts." Clara chuckled. "That's ambitious." Ethan shrugged. "They made it personal." An hour later, we were buried in paperwork. Clara led us to an archive room, boxes stacked high with property records, old maps, meeting minutes, annexation proposals from the late 1980s. In a dusty folder labeled Annexation Proposal Blocks, 16B to 18D, we found a single page that explained everything. In 1992, the Silver Pines HOA requested to annex parcels 17A through 18B. The proposal was rejected. The reason Parcel 17D was owned by a reclusive woman named Margaret Hensley, who refused multiple HOA overtures citing independence and a desire to remain ungoverned. She'd submitted a notarized letter declaring her intent to keep the land private and HOA-free. The city honored it. It had been on record ever since. Ethan let out a low whistle. So this land was never up for grabs. Clara nodded. "They've been pretending otherwise for 30 years. Ethan looked at me. "And they've gotten away with it, over and over." We thanked Clara and took the photocopies. That night, Ethan drafted an email. Not angry, not emotional, precise, professional. Addressed to Marlene Whitaker, CC'd to the HOA board, the city attorney's office, and the local news. Attached were the purchase documents, the certified survey, the 1992 annexation rejection letter, the harassment report filed with the sheriff, and a declaration of intent to proceed with all move-in activities, including development, landscaping, and property enhancement. It ended with one sentence: "Any further interference will be considered harassment and treated accordingly through legal channels." He clicked send. No response that night, but we didn't need one, because the next morning the truth was spreading. When we pulled into the driveway, 2 unfamiliar cars were parked across the street. Neighbors. One was an older man with a cane, the other a woman in her 40s with a stroller. They weren't there to complain. The man approached first. "You're the one standing up to the HOA." Ethan hesitated. "I guess you could say that." He extended a hand. "Good. Somebody needed to. I got fined last year for painting my mailbox. Been here since '89 and they treat me like a renter." The woman joined in. "They told me I couldn't hang wind chimes because it violated the soundscape. A wind chime like this is a monastery." Ethan and I exchanged glances. It was the first crack in the wall. The community, the one the HOA claimed to represent, was waking up. That day, an envelope arrived in the mailbox. Not from Marlene, but from Langston, the HOA lawyer. A single-page statement saying the HOA was withdrawing its temporary injunction request pending internal review. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just retreat. Ethan framed it and hung it above the workbench in the garage. "A trophy," he said. That evening we sat on the porch again. The sun was setting, casting gold across the treetops. The wind was calm. For the first time in a week, it felt like the land belonged to us, not just in title, but in spirit. "You know what's crazy?" Ethan asked. "What?" "This all started because we were moving a couch." I smiled. Sometimes couches are revolutions in disguise. He laughed, and for the first time since this began, it sounded genuine. Light. Free. But we knew it wasn't over. Because people like Marlene don't just vanish. They regroup. And when they do, they come back louder. We just lit the first match. If there's one thing I learned from my years in uniform, it's this: never mistake silence for surrender. The HOA may have pulled back after Ethan's email, but the ground felt unstable, like a minefield, ignored, not cleared. And sure enough, days later, the next wave came, not with golf carts or cease and desists, but something quieter, trickier. It began with flags. Tiny orange flags, hand-sized, planted neatly along Ethan's southern property, lined the one bordering the Silver Pines community garden. At first they looked harmless, like a city survey, but Ethan spotted the difference. "These aren't city-issued," he said, crouching beside one. "The stakes are unmarked. The numbering doesn't match the county's system." He was right. I'd seen enough surveys to know these weren't from any government contractor. The next day, a sign appeared, laminated, zip-tied to a post, driven into the soil near where Ethan's property met a walking trail. "Notice: property under review for boundary discrepancies. HOA survey team authorized to access land per Community Development Clause 5.07. It was absurd. No Clause 5.07 applied to us. No community development review could override county records. But it was a psychological maneuver. They weren't trying to win in court. They were trying to exhaust us into giving up, and they almost succeeded. Ethan was tired. He didn't say it, but I saw it in his face. The way his shoulders slumped more each day. The longer pauses when he looked at the land he'd fought for. He kept moving forward, fixing the shed, planting wildflowers by the driveway, but his steps were heavier now. "They're trying to reclaim the land by pretending it's theirs," he said one evening. "Like if they pretend hard enough, we'll believe it too." I sat beside him on the porch, sipping a cold soda. "So what do we do?" He didn't answer right away. But the next morning, I woke to the sound of shovels. Ethan was outside marking the true boundary lines using blue county flags this time. He'd downloaded GIS data, cross-checked it with his deed, and was laying markers every 10 feet. "This is mine," he said, hammering a flag into the dirt. "And I'll make damn sure they know it." We called Clara again. She came out that afternoon with a city engineer, and they walked the perimeter with a GPS device. When they finished, Clara pulled a metal stake from her truck. In bold letters, it read, "County Recognized Boundary. Do not remove." They placed it next to one of the HOA's orange flags, a silent rebuke. That evening, while we ate dinner on the porch, we saw them, Marlene and 2 HOA board members, standing near the community garden fence, staring at the blue markers. Marlene didn't speak, but her face was twisted with something I couldn't place. It wasn't anger, it was disbelief. The next morning, a letter arrived from a third-party land surveyor hired by the HOA board. They claimed to have found conflicting data on the ownership of a 5-foot strip along the southern edge. The letter was vague, full of terms like potential easement zone and mutual benefit for shared access. But the message was clear. They were trying to nibble away at the border, inch by inch. Ethan didn't flinch. He responded with a notarized letter, attaching the county survey, Clara's certification, and a warning that unauthorized entry would be trespassing. He sent copies to the city, the HOA, and the sheriff. And then we waited. Days passed. No more signs, no more flags. But on the 5th morning, we found tire tracks. Fresh ones, wide, heavy utility truck treads leading from the trail into Ethan's back lot. They'd driven onto the land. There were boot prints, too, at least 2 sets. No damage, nothing stolen, but it was a message. "They're not done," Ethan said, staring at the tracks. "They're just getting bolder." I called the sheriff. Officer Bennett came out, took photos, filed a report. "No cameras?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. He nodded. "I'd recommend it. At this point, you've got enough for a civil suit. Evidence helps." Ethan ordered cameras that night. Motion activated. high resolution, solar-powered. He mounted them himself, one at the front gate, two at the back edge. Signs went up the next day. 24-hour surveillance in progress. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The cameras caught everything. 3 nights later, at 1:42 a.m., a figure walked to the property line holding a measuring tape. He reached over, clipped a survey flag, and yanked it out. It was an HOA board member, the one who'd stood with Marlene during the driveway confrontation. The footage was clear. Time-stamped. Downloaded. Copied to a USB. We brought it to the sheriff's office. Officer Bennett didn't hesitate. That's criminal trespass and tampering with property markers. I'll escalate it. By the next week, a formal warning was issued to the HOA board signed by the sheriff and city planning office. Any further encroachment would lead to charges. The flags stopped disappearing. The letters stopped coming. But the damage wasn't to us, it was to the HOA itself. Whispers spread through the neighborhood. A local Facebook group posted about boundary bullying and abuse of enforcement. Someone uploaded a photo of our metal stake with a caption, "How many more fake flags before someone says enough?" The next community meeting was tense, we heard. Several longtime residents questioned the board's tactics. One man, the neighbor who'd thanked us, demanded a vote for an oversight committee. And Marlene, she didn't show up. Ethan watched it unfold with quiet resolve. No gloating, no smugness, just focus. This isn't just about land, he told me one night. It's about how far people will go to take what's not theirs and how far you have to go to stop them. He paused, then added, "But it's worth it." I believed him, because that land, hard won, hard defended, was more than dirt and grass. It was freedom. It wasn't long before the truth stopped being just ours. At first, it was whispers, cautious exchanges at mailboxes, headshakes near the community garden, sidelong glances from joggers passing our driveway. But whispers grow teeth, and soon Silver Pines wasn't as united under its iron-fisted HOA as it pretended to be. The spark came one Thursday morning, a post in the Silver Pines Neighborhood Forum on Facebook. From an anonymous account, Pine Truth Tatu 2, it read, "Ever wonder why Parcel 17D's homeowner was harassed by HOA board members with no legal jurisdiction? Or why Marlene Whitaker ordered a boundary review without city approval? The county says they're wrong. Time to ask why they act like they're above the law." Attached was a photo of our county-issued boundary marker, the survey flag, and a still from the camera showing the board member yanking a flag at 1:42 a.m. It was the match that lit a pile of dry grievances. Within an hour, comments exploded. They fined me $75 for daisies that were too tall. They made my son remove his basketball hoop, said it was unsightly. They cited me for leaving my trash bin out for more than 30 minutes. Why are we paying dues for a crumbling walking path if Parcel 17D isn't under HOA control? Why did we call the police on them? By afternoon, the post had been shared over 100 times, not just in Silver Pines, but in nearby groups. HOA horror stories were kindling, and Ethan's fight was the spark. It wasn't about him or a strip of land anymore. It was about power and its abuse. Then the media caught on. A reporter from Channel 8 News showed up in our driveway with a camera crew. Ethan hesitated, wary of becoming a story, but after we showed them the document's video sign and email trail, it was clear this was news. The segment aired that night, homeowner harassed by HOA over land they don't own. They filmed the boundary stake, the flagged markers, interviews with neighbors who'd received bogus violations. A city official off-record said, "We've seen a rise in HOA overreach complaints, some crossing into intimidation." The next morning, our driveway was packed, not with officials, with neighbors, elderly couples, young parents with toddlers, people we'd never met, all saying thank you. They brought pie, baked bread, a welcome plant, handwritten cards. One woman, Mrs. Alvarez, a widow here for 25 years, told Ethan through tears she'd been bullied into repainting her home twice in 1 year because her shade of cream was too yellow. "They fined me more than my pension," she said, clutching Ethan's hand. "But I didn't have the strength to fight." He didn't let go. He nodded, eyes steady. You don't have to fight alone anymore. That afternoon, an emergency HOA meeting was announced at the community clubhouse. The agenda was posted online. Public comments. Concerns regarding Parcel 17D. Discussion on community governance transparency. Interim leadership proposals. Marlene Whitaker was listed as the opening speaker. Ethan and I went. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We sat in the third row of folding chairs as the room filled with angry, tired, emboldened residents. The clubhouse walls, once lined with photos of HOA beautification projects, felt like relics of a fading empire. Marlene stood at the front with a tight smile. Her calm mask was cracking. She began defensively. This has been a challenging time for our community. There's been significant misinformation online. The board has always acted in Silver Pine's best interests. A hand shot up. A man in his 50s, bald voice sharp. Then why are you using our dues to hire a lawyer to intimidate someone who doesn't live in the HOA? Murmurs of agreement spread. Marlene tried to deflect. Legal reviews are necessary when jurisdiction is in dispute. Another hand. Mrs. Alvarez. Is it true you ordered a temporary injunction without a community vote? Marlene hesitated. There was urgency. More hands. Who authorized the boundary survey? Why are we getting fined while board members violate their own landscaping rules? Why are my dues increasing, with no infrastructure improvements? Then Ethan stood. The room hushed. Slowly, instinctively. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He held up a laminated county boundary map and spoke with quiet conviction. I bought my land legally. I paid for it with my hands, working long days and longer nights. I didn't ask to be part of your community, and I'm not. I've respected your space, your rules, even when they didn't apply to me. But you didn't respect mine. He looked at Marlene, then scanned the room. I don't want to tear anything down, but I'm not going anywhere. And I won't let anyone, HOA, neighbor, or board, tell me I don't belong on land I bought legally and honestly. Silence. Then someone clapped, then another, and another. Marlene's face flushed. Her hands gripped the podium. She opened her mouth, but her words were drowned by applause. The vote to suspend the board's discretionary powers passed that night. By 9 p.m., an interim oversight committee was formed. By morning, a third of the board, including Marlene, had resigned. Ethan and I watched the sunset from the porch, the world a little quieter. They'll try something else, he said. Probably, I replied. But this time, he said, smiling, people are watching. And he was right, because now the story wasn't just his. It belonged to the neighborhood, and the message was clear. You can't silence the truth forever. If the first 7 days were about survival, the 8th was a turning point, the moment we stopped playing defense. After the resignations, Ethan started getting emails. Not just congratulations or gratitude, but testimonies. Dozens. Neighbors we hadn't spoken to came forward, each story with the same rhythm, a warning letter, a fine, a threat, compliance born of exhaustion. One man was fined $200 for parking his RV during a family reunion, despite city approval. Another had his daughter's treehouse removed because it was visible from the road. A woman was forced to repaint her home 3 times in 2 years over tone inconsistencies. All of it recorded, all of it ignored. Until now. Ethan cataloged the messages. He built a folder on his laptop. Evidence of pattern. Inside were screenshots, photos of letters, scanned invoices, shaky phone videos of board members issuing threats. Each time-stamped, geotagged, logged. He wasn't gathering outrage. He was building a case. Are you sure you want to go this far? I asked one night. Ethan looked at me across the kitchen table, eyes steady. They didn't just mess with me. They messed with the idea that people can live in peace. That if you're quiet, they can rewrite the rules around you. He paused, then added, I'm not just defending my land anymore. I'm defending everyone who thought they couldn't push back. It was more than noble. It was necessary. A week later, we met Nora Blake, a civil rights attorney recommended by Clara. She was calm, analytical, piercingly direct. After reviewing Ethan's materials, she sat back and said, "This isn't just a boundary issue. This is systemic abuse of a private governance structure. We're looking at coordinated harassment, misappropriation of authority, and likely financial misconduct." Ethan blinked. "Patsas." Nora nodded. "HOAs must report how dues are spent. If they used funds to hire lawyers, conduct unauthorized surveys, or pursue residents outside their jurisdiction, that's fraud." She gave us a list depositions to gather residents to speak to requests for HOA budgets, meeting minutes, vote records. Ethan dove in like a man on a mission. Over 10 days, our kitchen became a war room. I watched him transform. The quiet son who once fixed guitars in the garage was now a strategist, fluent in legalese, navigating bureaucracy, with the determination of someone with nothing to lose but everything to protect. And the news spread. Channel 8 returned for a follow-up. The title, "Residents Demand Legal Review of HOA, This Isn't What We Signed Up For." The segment included interviews with 4 families, clips from past HOA meetings, and a drone shot showing the original property lines clearly marking where the HOA overstepped. Within 2 weeks, the City Council announced a public hearing to review the HOA's charter. That same week, Ethan filed a civil suit not just for himself, but with a group of residents as co-plaintiffs. Charges ranged from harassment and property interference to civil rights violations and misuse of funds. Marlene Whitaker was named in the filing. The next morning, someone egged our truck. It wasn't subtle. Eggs aimed at the windshield and mirrors. A note under the wiper, "You made this worse for everyone." We filed another report. Officer Bennett came out with a new officer. "We've had 3 vandalism complaints this week," he told us, "all tied to this HOA situation." Ethan stood arms crossed. "They're trying to make me the villain." Bennett looked at him. "Then show them what a hero looks like." He meant it. That night, Ethan wrote a public letter. He posted it to the neighborhood forum where the story had gone viral. Titled, "Why I'm Suing the HOA and Why It Matters." No attacks, no name-calling. Just facts, the purchase, the overreach, the harassment, the false flags, the surveillance, the tampering, the intimidation, the silence when truth knocked. Then he wrote, "I love this neighborhood. I bought my land here for peace, independence, community. But peace isn't quiet if it's built on fear. Independence doesn't exist if you're punished for it. Community isn't control, it's trust. I'm not suing for revenge. I'm suing because we deserve better." By morning, the post had over 400 likes, nearly 200 comments, most supportive, some cautious, some angry, but all engaged. It wasn't just his story anymore, it was theirs. Then came the city hearing, held in a municipal building downtown, in a large room packed with folding chairs and a low stage. News crews lined the back wall. Council members sat in front, flanked by legal advisors and clerks. Ethan spoke for 15 minutes. He brought diagrams, maps, letters, testimonies. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He informed. He educated. He dismantled the myth of benevolent HOA authority with receipts and grace. When he finished, a council member, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a hard-nosed reputation, leaned into her microphone. "It appears, Mr. Carver, you've done more due diligence than the board whose jurisdiction you're challenging. We thank you for your courage." Marlene wasn't there. Neither were the 2 remaining original board members. They'd resigned 2 days earlier. The council voted unanimously to audit the Silver Pines HOA, and with that, the tide turned. Ethan came home that night and sat on the porch steps, the wind rustling the trees. He didn't say much. Just stared across the land he'd fought to reclaim, not just from those who'd take it, but from the fear that they could. I sat beside him. "You did it." He smiled, soft and tired. "Not yet. But for the first time, it feels like we're not alone." By the time fall rolled around, Silver Pines didn't feel the same. Gone were the morning golf cart patrols policing lawn heights or mailbox paint. The laminated warning signs were gone. The air, once heavy with the pressure of compliance, had lightened. Even the birds seemed louder. And yet something deeper was shifting, not just policy, but power. The city audit team arrived 2 weeks after the council's vote. No flash, no press conferences. Just quiet, methodical professionals, clipboards, laptops, manila folders, reviewing budgets, meeting minutes, HOA correspondence. Their mandate: investigate financial mismanagement, illegal jurisdiction, expansion, misuse of dues. Results came quickly. A preliminary report, leaked perhaps intentionally, to a local columnist following Ethan's case. The headline shook the neighborhood. Audit uncovers Silver Pines. HOA spent $47,000 in legal fees without member approval. The article detailed how the HOA used funds for Langston Law Group, including the failed injunction against Ethan boundary surveys and media reputation management. Worse, $11,000 was spent on community enhancement studies with no paper trail, no contractors, no bids, no services. The storm hit hard. Residents demanded an emergency assembly, and they got it. A Saturday afternoon meeting at the clubhouse, standing room only. Over 200 homeowners came. Many held printed audit reports. Some brought signs. "Where's our money? We deserve a vote. You work for us." Not the other way around. Ethan and I sat in the back. He wasn't on the agenda, didn't want to make it about him. He'd done his part now, it was the neighborhood's turn. The new interim oversight committee spoke first. A local accountant, a retired teacher, a software engineer. All longtime residents, volunteering to reform the organization. They presented findings, explained bylaws, announced 3 changes. A vote to remove the HOA's discretionary budget authority. A proposal to amend the charter requiring all legal actions to be pre-approved by homeowners. A motion to recognize Parcel 17D and other unannexed properties as outside HOA jurisdiction. All 3 passed, overwhelmingly. Then came the stunner. A man in his 60s stood, microphone in hand. He wore a ball cap, his face weathered from years outdoors. "My name's Frank Delgado," he said. "I used to work for the city inspector's office. Retired last year. And I've got something to say." He opened a folder and held up a document. In 2017, this HOA applied to redefine boundaries to include parcels 17D and 18A. They were denied. Twice. But I have emails from Marlene Whitaker requesting enforcement of expanded oversight anyway, with no legal authority. I told her it wasn't legal. She said, and I quote, "Most people won't push back." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He turned to the room. "Well, someone did. And now it's time we all did." That was the final blow. 2 days later, the city council issued a censure against the former HOA board, barring several members, including Marlene, from serving on any registered HOA leadership body in the city for 5 years. Marlene sold her home that week. The sign went up fast, the sale closed in days. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence, the final act of someone who once ruled like a monarch, now a footnote in her own story. Langston Law Group withdrew from representing Silver Pines. Quietly. Discreetly. No press release. But the community wasn't done healing. Inspired by what happened, Ethan and the interim committee launched a homeowner empowerment forum to educate residents about their rights, HOA boundaries, and how to challenge unlawful citations. Ethan stood at the front during the first session, beside a whiteboard and a box of printed guides. Know your land, know your rights. He wasn't nervous. He was home. He explained his journey, the flags, the false claims, the threats, the cameras, the suit, not with bitterness, but with purpose. "These systems only survive when people stay quiet," he said. "The best tool against overreach is understanding." The room applauded. A woman stood and asked, "Would you consider running for the board?" Ethan smiled. "No. I just want to build a place where neighbors don't have to think about the board at all." After the session, we sat on the porch. The sky streaked orange and gold. Fall leaves whispered across the gravel. Somewhere a child's laughter rang out. Ethan looked at the property line, once contested, now quiet. Peaceful. His. "You know," he said, "for a while I thought buying this land was the best decision I ever made." He turned to me. "But standing up for it, that was the real win." I couldn't agree more. Because what started as one man defending a boundary had become something bigger, a neighborhood waking up, a power structure toppling, a reminder that authority must be earned, not seized. And in the end, truth drew the line and held it. The first snowfall came early that year. It arrived like a hush, covering rooftops, fences, walkways, signs, even the old community garden that had been the site of so much tension. Under a thin blanket of white, everything looked softer, cleaner, like it had been rewritten. Ethan stood by the property's edge that morning, coffee in hand, boots crunching frost-covered leaves. He'd just finished installing a wooden bench beneath the tree line facing west toward the sunset. It wasn't much reclaimed oak, weatherproofed, hand-sanded, but it was something he'd wanted to build for a long time. A place to sit, to breathe, to own the peace he'd earned. "You going to name it?" I asked, walking up beside him. He smiled. Already did. He pointed to a small engraved plaque on the backrest. It read, the line held. We sat there a while, no words needed. The creek beyond the trees gurgled softly, its banks lined with bare branches and late-season grasses. The air was cold but kind, the kind of chill that clears your head, not numbs your bones. It had been a long road. The legal case against the HOA continued now, in the deposition phase. With new leadership, the neighborhood was transforming, not just in policy, but in culture. Rules were rewritten, transparency protocols implemented. Meetings now included homeowner votes. No more secret emails, no more silent fines. Most notably, a new clause was added to the charter. No homeowner shall be subject to governance without signed consent and clear legal inclusion. It was called the Carver Clause. Ethan hadn't asked for that, but he didn't decline it either, because it wasn't about credit. It was about closure. One afternoon, months after the conflict's peak, a letter arrived. Not from a lawyer or neighbor. Handwritten in blue ink on thick stationery. Ethan. I watched from afar. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to get involved. I was wrong. You stood up not just for your land, but for all of us, too tired, too afraid, or too used to being told, that's just how it is. Thank you. A grateful neighbor. Ethan folded the letter slowly, fingers brushing the ink. He didn't say much, just tucked it into the back of the lawsuit folder, a quiet reminder of the battle, fought not just on driveways and property lines, but in hearts and minds. That winter, he built raised beds for a vegetable garden, repainted the shed, added solar panels to the roof. His life, once in limbo, now had roots not just in the soil, but in purpose. I watched from a distance, helping where I could. But mostly, I stood back and let him grow into the space he'd reclaimed. One night, we lit a bonfire in the back fire pit, just the two of us. The flames cracked and danced, sending sparks into the dark like fireflies. Ethan stared into them, then said something I didn't expect. "You know I didn't win because I sued them." I looked over. No, he shook his head. I won the moment I didn't give in. The moment I said, "This is mine," and meant it. He turned to me, eyes soft. "Thanks for standing with me." I smiled. "You're my son. I'll always stand with you." He chuckled. Even against a swarm of Marlenes, especially then. We laughed until our sides hurt. That spring, the bench became a landmark. Neighbors used it as a meeting spot. One couple brought coffee there every Sunday. A retired man came to read. Kids used it as a base for hide and seek. Ethan never claimed it. Never corrected them when they called it the thinking bench or the peace seat. But I knew what it was. A monument. Not to defiance, but to dignity. Not to conflict, but to courage. And in the end, that's what this was about. Not lines in the dirt or bylaws in a binder, but the simple, sacred right to live freely, peacefully, honestly. To defend what's yours without becoming the thing you're fighting. To say no not with rage, but with reason. To hold the line not out of pride, but out of principle. Ethan did that. And in doing so, he gave us all permission to remember we could do the same. So now when I drive down the winding road to Parcel 17D past the old signs and newer ones past the gate now unlocked and welcoming, I don't see a plot of land. I see a man who stood his ground. a son who became something bigger than he planned, and a neighborhood once ruled by silence learning to raise its voice. Because the truth is simple. When you know where your line is, you don't have to shout. You just have to stand and let the rest fall into place.